and I'd like to bring in our distinguished guests and participants at this topical webinar who have joined this, this site. We have 83, 84 now and counting members logged in already. My name is Ajibola Olomola, and I am a partner with KPMG, located within the tax practice of the firm. I am delighted to welcome everyone to this very topical webinar on the value-added tax debate. And of course, knowing that the matter is still making its way through the court system, we'll be following alternative paths this morning and not necessarily commenting on the matters that may be sub judice. But it is still a very relevant issue for manufacturing companies and virtually all taxpayers in Nigeria that are already in the tax net, indirect taxes being the most efficient form of taxation worldwide. I should like to introduce our distinguished participants and panelists this morning. But before I do so, I should like to announce a few housekeeping rules. We would please ask that everyone keep their microphones on mute until it is your time to speak. At the same time, except for panelists, all videos have been disabled. Please bear with us. This is to enable us minimize distractions. And also, we would ask that everyone puts their mobile phones on silent mode so as to also avoid and minimize distractions. It's going to be an engaging debate, but we will have moderators going through the Q&A box. So if you have questions, comments, please put them through to the Q&A box and they will be attended to. We assure you that all your comments will be read out, all your questions will be asked, and you will get the answers that you require. Without further ado, I should like to introduce the panelists for today. I will start with, in no particular order, my sister, who is also technically one of the super regulators in Nigeria that we all have to fear to love or love to fear, as the case may be, Ehile Adetola Aibangbe. She is a fiscal policy expert and non-executive board member, Federal Inland Revenue Service. And for many years, Adetola contributed to the payment of my salary, to which I owe her a lifetime of debt and gratitude. Adetola is one of our distinguished panelists. Secondly, we have Dr. Mark Abani, formerly of the UK HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. He is the founder CEO of MSCA Project Worldwide and currently the coordinating dean of the 5 faculties of the Chartered Institute of Taxation. Dr. Abani is a man of many stories. There is no meeting I've taken with him where he does not regale us with one very relevant story or another from his time either at HMRC or when he's tending to his favorite pastime being his farm. And these are really life lessons that we all can benefit from. And I expect that before the end of this webinar, Dr. Abani would have shared a few stories with us. Next on the list is the most, probably one of the 70 most successful lawyers in Nigeria today, Professor Abiola Sani, who together with 69 others were announced as qualifying and being awarded with the prestigious rank of Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Professor Sani is a man we're all very proud of. If anybody epitomizes tax, Professor Sani epitomizes tax. He has been a senior person at a Big 4 firm. He has been a practicing lawyer. He is a professor of law at Unilag, where he specializes in commercial law taxation. He is also the prime motivator behind the establishment of tax clubs in all universities across the Federation of Nigeria. Professor Sani, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, is someone for whom tax is bread and butter. And last but certainly not least, another very distinguished personality, in the person of Dr. Titi Fowokon. Dr. Fowokon actually needs no introduction. In her day job, she's the group head, strategic tax and compliance at Dangote Industries Limited. She has other jobs. She's also leader of Women in Taxation of Nigeria. In fact, there's nowhere in Nigeria where you hear tax being discussed, and Dr. Fowokon is not involved in one way or the other. In her earlier life, she worked with one of the big four, and she had a distinguished career there. Then she went into oil and gas, where she worked with one of the biggest oil and gas companies in Nigeria as their head of taxation, and now head at Dangote, the leading manufacturing company in Nigeria. So this is the distinguished panel that we have assembled for you this morning. And I know that we will all benefit from their unique and diverse insights. And as we move on, I should like to also show you the agenda for the day, which is that I will have Wole Obayomi, who is the head of tax for Nigeria and for Africa at KPMG, to deliver the opening remarks, and then we'll go into the panel session in the order in which I have introduced the panelists, after which we will have the questions and answers session that will be moderated by Akinwale Alao. Akinwale is one of our associate directors at KPMG and previously head of our technical team at KPMG, a man that has been involved in helping to publish KPMG thought leadership material in this and several other topical areas. He's truly a man with a very wide breadth of knowledge. So he will moderate the Q&A session, and then we'll have closing remarks by Mr. Obayomi, who is, as I said, our boss head at KPMG. And then Nike Olakunri will deliver the vote of thanks. So without further ado, and I see that we are saving on time, so I will be delivering this to Wole with a saving of 3 minutes, and hopefully we can keep this trend of being ahead of time throughout the session today. So Wole, I will invite you to give your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Ajibola. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Ajibola. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all for joining today's important webinar on the VAT debate in Nigeria. My special thanks and recognition go to our distinguished eminent panelists who have been assembled carefully to share their thoughts on the raging VAT debate in Nigeria, which is triggered by the judgment of Justice Stephen Palm on the Port Harcourt Division of the Federal High Court on 9th August 2021, and then which was followed by enactment of VAT laws by Rivers and Lagos State, with Ogun State also following behind. In giving these opening remarks, I actually do not intend to express any views whatsoever on the VAT debate, as I would not like to preempt panelists with the credentials that Ajibola reeled out. I really feel intimidated. So who am I therefore to express any view before them? So rather, as a host, I feel that it will be better for me to just set the stage for the conversation by asking some critical questions, the answers to which could help us to cut through the complexity of the VAT conundrum and find a way forward on VAT legislation and administration in our dear country. The questions I will ask are constitutional in nature, even though I'm not a constitutional lawyer, as I'm of the view that at the core of the VAT debate is the constitutionality of the VAT Act and VAT itself as a tax in Nigeria, following the Federal High Court judgment that I alluded to earlier. Now, what are these questions? There are 12 of them, and I'm hoping that in the course of this debate, we'll be able to find answers to them and then define the way forward for Nigeria in resolving the VAT debate. My first question is, who has the constitutional power between the federal and state governments to legislate on VAT? And to what extent can each of the two tiers of government go in this regard? I ask this question because VAT is not expressly mentioned in the exclusive and concurrent legislative list in Schedule 2, Parts 1 and 2 of the 1999 Constitution as amended. The second question is, has the non-mention of VAT on the exclusive and concurrent legislative list automatically reduced VAT to an item on the unwritten residual list over which only the state governments have the power to make VAT laws to the exclusion of the federal government? Third question, is VAT such a trivial issue that the draftsman of the Constitution will have left it as a residual legislative item? Fourth question, if VAT is not so trivial, why would the draftsman of the Constitution leave such a significant matter to the residual list? Fifth question, if the draftsman indeed intended VAT to be a residual legislative item, why would they allow VAT Decree 1993, which has been designated as an act of National Assembly by the Constitution, to survive the Constitution as a federal legislation? Sixth question, must VAT be specifically mentioned on the exclusive and or concurrent legislative list before the federal government could legislate on it? Seventh question, if the phrase trade and commerce in item 62 of the exclusive legislative list means supply of goods and services, and VAT is a tax on supply of goods and services, could the power of the federal government to legislate on VAT not be subsumed under this item? And if that is the case, could the catch-all provisions of items 67 and 68 of the exclusive legislative list not serve as the enabling provisions through which the federal government can legislate on VAT under item 62 that I've just referenced? Items 67 and 68 of the second schedule to the Constitution provides any other matter that is defining the exclusive legislative power of the federal government now, say that any other matter with respect to which the National Assembly has power to make laws in accordance with the provisions of this Constitution. And 68, any matter incidental or supplementary to any matter mentioned elsewhere in this list. Okay, meaning that the federal government has the power under these general provisions to legislate on any item which has been specifically mentioned or any other matter over which the National Assembly has power to make laws in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Eighth question, if that is agreed, that the federal government could legislate on trade and commerce and impose tax thereon, should the federal government of Nigeria not preserve the exclusive legislative power on VAT over trade and commerce between Nigeria and other countries and trade and commerce between the states, as provided in item 62 of the exclusive legislative list? Ninth question, if that is also agreed, should a state's concurrent and or residual legislative power on VAT not be limited to trade and commerce within its territory? 10th question, should the future of VAT in Nigeria not be so delineated to enable us to have a true fiscal federalism that states have been clamoring for? 11th question, if that will be the case, how can we create an atmosphere for fiscal harmony in the polity to avoid unhealthy competition and rivalry between the states over VAT on the same interstate transaction that will put oppressed taxpayers at the receiving end? 12th question, if it's agreeable that VAT Act operating side by side VAT laws in the states is a possibility, should we not reach a consensus on the shape and form of VAT in the country based on either the origin or destination principles or principle before states begin to enact their VAT laws based on conflicting principles? There can only be a recipe for anarchy in our fiscal system. Now, these are questions that I believe are fundamental to the resolution of the VAT debate. And I would say that there's perhaps no other legislation on tax matters that has generated so much debate on the taxing rights between the federal and state governments as the VAT Act. I really thought about other laws. This is the one that's really most controversial in terms of the division of legislative power between the federal and state governments. And hopefully, we're going to get clarity to this at the end of today's debate. again, followed authoritatively by the pronouncements of the courts, where the appeals are currently pending. I'm hoping that our distinguished panelists will share their thoughts and insights on my queries as they take turn to speak to us at this important webinar. I have to be back to give the closing remarks, where I will have the opportunity to speak to you on the way forward after I will have had the privilege of listening to our panelists and contributions from all of you participants. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful webinar. Over to you, Ajibola.
Thank you, Wole Obayomi, Prince of Ijebuland. So without further ado, after listening to Wole framing the issues, I should like to invite my sister and distinguished director of the FRS, Ehile Adetola Aibangbe, to take the podium and share her views on the subject matter.
Good morning, everyone, and many thanks, Ajibola. Please, I'd like to share my screen. I still can't. Can you help me? I'd like to say good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's such a delight to see friends and colleagues once again. And I also like to say thank you to KPMG for extending the privilege to come and talk to their clients this morning. Thank you very much. Listening to Wole, I'm now wondering whether I received the wrong invite, but hopefully I will be able to answer some of his questions. But my job this morning is pretty simple. I will sort of highlight how we got here, talk about what I think are the implications for a decentralized VAT system, and hopefully I will be able to answer some of the questions that Wole had mentioned. And I'll also talk about, I just thought it would be also nice to share with the House about what I think my ideas will be on how to sustain our IGR urge. I'll give my final thoughts and then I'll yield the floor. I mean, the VAT debate isn't new, I would say, in my own view, clearly. One thing is quite clear, even with economies that practice our form of government or the other, each and every one of them have some form of, whether it's a production or consumption tax. And we even have some instances where some have both. An interesting country is a country like Brazil. Brazil has both. They have both a federal VAT law and also a state tax and service law. In terms of how we got here in Nigeria, our sales tax started the journey started in about 86, when we then introduced the sales tax due to escalating cost of public expenditure. But the sales tax was quite limited, and also there was a lot of burden on production, particularly the manufacturers. Then in 1991, 1992, the study group started. And when the study group started, we had two study groups and then we had a committee as well. So when this started, it was clear that we needed to move away from sales tax to some form of VAT. Our bet was unsure what kind of VAT that will be. But then in 94, we started what we termed the Nigerian VAT. I like to call it the Nigerian VAT when I talk to clients because it's particularly different. Because amongst other things, we don't have full input back recovery, amongst other things. And like Wole said, this is just a 17-page document, but it's the most controversial law that we have in country. 1999, total revenue from VAT was about $2.1 billion, and we're still struggling to double that even as that last year. So really, the jury is still out on whether we have really achieved much with VAT. Because if you transpose that figure with our current consumption index numbers, it's clear to us that there's still a lot of room for growth. In 2003, we had another group led by the late Professor Dr. Phillips and Sheyibi, and the late Sheyibi. And in reading about the summaries and reports from those groups, it was quite clear that the Nigerian VAT had a myriad of inconsistencies that Wole had highlighted. And it was quite clear that the Constitution didn't say anything on VAT, on sales tax, on consumption tax. So it's still unclear to us whether this was a mischief, whether this was just an error, or whether, I mean, it's out there really for whoever to speculate as to what this is. They had 4 recommendations that they had given then. Only one of the recommendations were done. One of the recommendations were, amend the constitution because VAT as a federal law was neither listed in ELL or PLL. And also there were issues with respect to the revenue sharing formula. But that nothing was done until about April this year, when we then took a decision to sort of close this lacuna and submit some recommendations to NAS on VAT, on tax law amendments, and one on constitutional amendments, and one of them was VAT. Our submission went to NAS in about July, and then the debate started. And right now we are in what we call status quo status quo remains. In terms of how our statistics ranged, Lagos was top in terms of derivation, about 50.5% from Lagos, and Oyo was about number 3 with about 2.9% from Oyo. Oyo was actually quite interesting to see that Oyo was actually the 3rd revenue earner, and FCT was number 2 with 13.2%. Zamfara continued to rank last with about 0.6%. That is not strange to us as well, also because a lot of the produce from them most likely are even VAT exempt and all that. Revenue in terms of that went to both state government and Lagos State. Lagos had about 14.7% and Zamfara had about 1.6% in terms of revenue. If you look at the entire share and split of VAT, about 81% went to both the state and local governments. I mean, while there are really good things to say about decentralizing the VAT, decentralizing our VAT regime, but when the states are allowed to collect, I mean, I haven't seen the data that supports that there will be any winner. Even the rich states at the subnational level, particularly those that even term themselves rich states, there are things that they need to grapple with. And why I'm not for this particularly is what it does to organized private sector. Because in my view, I think this isn't good for Nigeria. I use an example of the way we are structured as a country. You have one part of the country predominantly producing what we eat, and another part of the country predominantly processing it. If you then have this, what then happens? The part that is producing what we eat, which is predominantly VAT exempt or even 0 rated, we need to start charging some form of tax on what they are producing so that they can also remain competitive. And then that translates to increased cost of doing business. It just erodes our ease of doing business index. Secondly, there's also the debate around capacity to collect with the state. We've seen it even with PIC right now. The abysmal performance of PIC at the subnational level clearly tells us that there is really no structure or lack of adequate structure for a lot of these states to effectively and efficiently collect taxes. So rather than hand over this back to them again and just let it go down the same drain as PIC is going, I don't see that as something that is very justifiable. Third is the inefficiency and the high cost of collection. We have states in this country that the cost of collection ranges between 10 to 20%. We even have a municipality in this country, like a county, that the cost of collection is about 40%. If you are complaining about 4% that FRS is currently collecting, so imagine 40%. This isn't good for Nigeria. So I don't think this is the way to go. There's also the issue about their lack of technology, their inefficiency in their structures. How would they do it? Their lack of transparency. Who do we hold accountable? In reading some of the tax laws that have been enacted by some of the VAT laws that have been enacted by the state, it is quite clear that even the share that they're going to even give to the local government is much, much smaller than what the federal allocation is currently to the local government. So who is harming who? Because that tells us that it's going to set back a lot of the autonomy debate that we're currently having with the local government, and then set back development, because the local governments are the ones that are closest to the people, and development should actually come from them. I don't disagree that there are arguments for a decentralized VAT, whether you're looking at resource control, you're looking at fiscal federalism, religious sentiment, equity. I don't disagree there. But I would say that in most of the federal systems that I've had the opportunity to research and review, there is always some form of equalization, always and always and always. Because what you don't want to do is allow the states with lower capacity to raise revenue, bring you down to their level. So you will have to see in a lot of states, there's always that equalization fund to support lower states that have capacity. And it's nothing strange that we're doing what we're doing with respect to VAT. And I would say in looking at our taxes, in 2020, total taxes was about $15 billion. 93% of this went to states and local governments. So the conversation is what was done with the 93%. Thirdly is also every federal system has what is collected by the federal government, what is collected by the state government, and what is collected by the local authorities. Land, which is one of the predominant things that resides with the state, even in Nigeria as well. You know, land is predominantly owned by the state. I then wonder why they are not looking inward. Last year, a decision was taken to exempt land and interest on land from VAT. And that decision was done so that it can enable the effective implementation of stamp duty on land and landed properties. As I speak to you, I don't think any state has taken advantage of that. So the conversation is, how do they then re-strategize and focus on increasing the base for one, personal income taxes? The personal income taxes that was earned by the entire federation was about $3.4 billion. South Africa alone earned about $36 billion last year. From a population of 60 million, we have 200 million giving us about 3.4. So how do we restructure? How do we look at our personal income tax scope again? What do we want to do? Do we want it to become? Do we want to have a federal personal income tax law? Is it so difficult to administer at the state level? How do they want to use technology? Things like your national identification number with NIN, your BVN. How has the state been able to use technology to effectively increase, their personal income tax scope and base? What are they doing from a corporate property perspective and individual property taxes perspective? Secondly, I would say to sustain the IGR is centralized IGR for collection. We've seen states that have done this for effective administration and accountability. States like Kaduna, they significantly moved from where they used to be to where they are now, just by centralizing alone. It hasn't affected services, it hasn't affected the running of the state, neither has it affected governance. Thirdly, I would say is a holistic review of what the various state laws look like in terms of the revenue laws for the state, whether you're looking at the legal framework, the identification, collection, and dispute resolution process. And this is where I think they can really help redefine the role of the JTB by asking the JTB more questions in terms of how can we better use the JTB, particularly for states that are not so rich. How can we leverage on the JTB, and the JTB can help us, whether it's in aggregation of data, interpretation of data, to make sure that the personal income taxes ratio comes up. 10% is a bit abysmal. Existing contract agreements with revenue collection agencies, these are overdue. Some of these contracts are anti-Nigeria. So I would say some of these contracts need to be reviewed. Lastly, in terms of how we sustain our leading IGR, I would say is we must lead by example, right? And get involved in open government partnership. He wants to be a governor of your state. He wants to be a senator from your state. How much has he paid in taxes? Where is his tax clearance certificate? He's going to court to go and go against a judgment to say, I was robbed of the election. Why are the judges not asking for his tax clearance certificate? This guy is going to be in charge of the treasury of the state, and he hasn't even paid a dime to the state. People need to get involved in asking questions of their leaders in terms of, I want to see you lead by example. And then also make examples of evaders, because it's only when you then lead by example, you can actually query or make examples of evaders. My final thought before I yield the floor will be, one, I would say we shouldn't let the house collapse. Like Wole had rightly mentioned in terms of the fact that the Constitution is very clear on this. There are avenues that the government can actually use to say this, but we would rather go the right way by letting the courts decide and interpret. But more importantly is that we shouldn't let the house collapse, because data has showed us that we're stronger as a bigger nation that works than silos and small units with borders. Two, we can resolve our differences, right? We have varied concerns. Some of them may be the issue of derivation. Okay, fine. Can we then start asking that the derivation be increased, making it more reflective of contributions from each state? perhaps it's time to do away with population, because I've also had that debate as well with some people that say, oh, perhaps it's time to do away with population as a revenue allocation formula, since the population is actually we're not seeing the fruits of population in terms of revenue generation. What about establishing a system where states that ban certain economic activities do not benefit from VAT on such activities? We have countries that do that already. So if you don't allow alcohol within your jurisdiction, then you don't enjoy from the sale on alcohol. But how much is this really? It's a very negligible sum. VAT on contracts. I also thought of the debate around VAT on government contracts. Okay, so if I issue a contract as Lagos State government, perhaps if the contract is in Lagos State, is within Lagos State, can I retain the VAT in Lagos State? Those are some of the conversations we can have as a people, so that we don't just tear apart the republic rather than fix the republic. No matter the side of divide we're in, it's quite clear that an amendment to the VAT Act is long overdue. So for me, I think it's high time that we redesign our VAT Act, which is what we thought we're trying to do in July, and then we resolve our differences. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adetola. And as usual, you have answered a lot of the questions, but you have asked a lot more questions. So I thought you were going to reduce my headache, but I see that you've given me homework to do. Well, there are questions around efficiency, there are questions around organization, about the foundational principles on which the entire framework should be established, the manner in which federating units should relate with each other in achieving a single national objective, which is to harness revenue from the producing areas of the federation. Several questions we have raised, we've noted all of them, and these are real topical questions. I'm hoping that the next set of speakers will give more answers than questions. Otherwise, Wole would have a real hard time chatting a way forward at the end. But this has been really good. We'll come back to some of those things you've said, because there are a number of them that require challenge and further interrogation. And I can see that in the Q&A section, comments and questions are already flying in. So I'll invite Dr. Abani to please share his views at this point.
Thank you very much, Ajibola, and thank you, Ehile, for setting the scene so admirably, and indeed the series of challenges involved not just directly in VAT, but in the underlying administration of the entire system. You've correctly pointed out the origins of VAT, and indeed it replaced the sales tax. And at the time, everybody recognized that the sales tax was a state tax. So the tensions were inbuilt right from the very beginning, when what was essentially trying to tidy up a sales tax, bring some consistency across the nation and some certainty for taxpayers, ended up slightly differently as, and what I like the way you call it, Nigerian VAT. Nigerian VAT is different for quite a number of reasons. Its base is different from many of the ones internationally. The fact that it's not a simple in-out process where you can clearly see that the end user is paying the VAT, but along the way, other parties are able to recharge and collect back and take their input tax, VAT, and so on and so forth. So there are very fundamental reasons there. I venture to say that a lot of what, especially around the input and output VAT and a lot of other taxes, refunds is another very topical matter, is partly to do with our lack of trust internally with ourselves. So we try to build in anti-corruption safeguards into legislation in a way they are not designed to, and that distorts the entire taxation system and the picture. There are a lot more erudite people on this conversation who will be discussing the answers to Wole's questions on constitutionality. I do agree, however, that there are a number of routes that could be exploited. But we are in a situation where we are not just talking VAT, we're not just talking technical matters. We are now discussing things that are part of the political economy. The political economy, the entire framework we're sitting in, the particular season we are entering, which is into the next election round, all mean that what would be calm, sensible conversations all have various nuances. And so we need to bear that in mind as we go through. So perhaps one of the first pleas I would have is that the Supreme Court, bearing in mind the significance of their judgment in this particular case, actually fast forwards the decision they're going to take so that we have certainty around what their view is, while at the same time, we have conversations at different levels, both political, regional, and so on, in order to keep the country whole and to run whatever tax that comes out, an efficient tax that actually brings money to the table in the correct way. Very often, I do a lot of my discussions by saying I'm going to teach grandmothers to suck eggs. And sometimes it's true that the grandmothers may have forgotten that there are different ways you can suck an egg and still keep the shell intact. And I'll go back to Adam Smith. And one of Adam Smith's primary principles was that there would be certainty of taxation. What you're paying, how much you're paying, and who you're paying it to. Until this debate really took off, there was a certain amount of certainty. We knew what the VAT was. We may have grumbled about the rise in the VAT to 7.5%, still very much below the West African average, and certainly nowhere near where it should be. Many other countries have up to 20% as value-added tax. Indirect taxes like value-added taxes are rising. They are generally non-regressive, as long as they apply to the correct items. And in Nigeria, the exemption list is very large, covers a lot of the agricultural stuff, including semi-processed and in some cases processed basic food stuff like rice and gari and so on. And there's moves to add other things there. It specifically in the Finance Acts 2019-2020 made modifications, including exempting lands and buildings from the VAT space. Very, very important because, as was rightly pointed out, we are not exploiting property taxes properly, and the property taxes are essentially for state governments to exploit. I know there's work going on through some assistance, international assistance coming in to try and tag a lot of the properties using satellite imagery and so on, in order to try and help states identify properties and charges that need to go alongside them. Now, there are quite a number of complexities if you start to run VAT at state level and possibly at federal level, depends upon exactly what the outcome of the law cases are and the options that are available to take. But when you start to do this, you are adding a lot of complexity. If you buy your raw materials, say you buy timber from Oshogo, but you are building it into furniture in Abia State, who is charging VAT, where, and on what? This brings into question something that already there are a lot of issues around, and what's the tax point? Generally, VAT is a tax on the final consumer, but now the questions are going to rise. Where is the final consumer for this, especially given the Nigerian tax doesn't do the input-output all the way through the process? So is the tax point going to be the place of business of the supplier? Is it going to be the place where it was consumed? Say I go and buy that chair from Aba, but I sell it from my shop in Ebonyi State, or I sell it from my shop in Nasarawa State. How are we going to deal with the input-output VAT charges? Or are we just simply going to be passing on increasing costs to the taxpayers? So there are quite a number of technical matters that are going to arise there. If we go back to the constitutional matters, maritime and those sorts of items are on the exclusive lists. So does that mean that all the imports, VAT on imports, would go to the federal government? Would it go to the federal government under the current sharing formula where the money goes back to states, or would it now be federal government money alone? If you look at the statistics, I think in 2019, 2020, 51% of the VAT came from imports. So how exactly is this going to be charged? Is it that everything that comes through One Port or Lagos Port or Apapa Port will be charged in those states? How fair is that? How real is that? So those are some of the issues that will be arising. There will be a lot of confusion that will affect foreign direct investment and foreign business within Nigeria. It's difficult enough for some of the larger international companies who make supplies of goods, and they should be taxed in Nigeria. And from my interaction with a lot of them, they are ready to be taxed in Nigeria. But are they now going to, say you buy something off the internet, it's now imported, there's a VAT as it enters into Nigerian space. Is there going to be another VAT when it is delivered to your house in the FCT? What exactly is going to arise? Will that complexity allow some of these companies to continue to supply within Nigeria, or will it create an entire new sub-industry that may itself find a way of circumventing the entire tax rules? We also know that personal income tax is not being effectively run. I discussed this with a lot of states. There are very few people who are paying anywhere near the amount of tax they should pay. South Africa's success is that a very few at the top, the majority of people don't pay personal income tax. It's only a very few at the top that pay it. The leaders, those who are making that sort of money. In Nigeria, we're still talking of 2,000 people paying above 5 million naira a year in personal income tax. That's disgraceful. Almost every lawyer worth his salt should be paying at least 5 million naira in tax, personal income tax, because they are not taxed under companies, they are taxed under their personal income. We have all of the accountants, we have all of the professions, and studies by the World Bank have shown that it's actually the professionals who do not pay some of these taxes that they're supposed to pay. We also know that some lawyers have actually taken FIRS to court under the current rules to say that they're providing services that are not VATable. And so there are a lot more debates. How many of these debates are then going to go on across the 36 states plus the FCT if we do not have an overarching system that allows us a certain amount of sanity in the whole place? And there's, of course, the potential for double taxation. Now, there are also issues of capacity. Personal income tax is not administered and not bringing in the money because there's no political will to go after the high net worth individuals. We all know people who are earning 50, 100, 200 million. We know them. They give out donations in those amounts. Where are they paying their personal income taxes? State governments are not going after them. There's a general lack of political will to go after those highbrow people, which trickles down to everybody's attitude. There's also other questions that have got nothing to do with any of those ones, and that's the deficit, the trust deficit between taxpayers and the government and how monies are expended. So right now, there's been some work with the Nigerian Governors Forum to see how you can tie taxes to specific activities, like a tax for service. If a market woman is paying her taxes, should she not have enrollment in a state health insurance scheme that makes sure that her children have proper true anti-malarial drugs? Remember, malaria is one of the biggest killers of under 5-year-olds. So there is, playing into this entire space, a trust deficit between government and government at different tiers, between government and taxpayers. And until we start to tackle some of the transparency and accountability around some of these issues, all of these ones are symptoms that are playing out as a result of those uncertainties. There are capacity issues, there are law issues. Already we have seen from the draft laws, well, they're no longer draft laws, they are laws that are in place from Rivers and Lagos, that they are not as modern as they could be. There are some differential in rates, which will add additional complexity. You bring in your items that suffer 7.5%, and then you are now charging another 6%. How are you going to recover your full amount of taxes? Are you now subsidizing the state? Of course not. It will all translate down into price for people. One of the things around trust, and we've done a lot of work with the states, 30 of the 36 states now have consolidated revenue codes, which means that all the monies that are charged have gone through the House of Assembly. Now, they're not yet harmonized, because an industry can still be charged by the Ministry of Commerce, the other people. So there's a lot of stuff that's not harmonized, but at least those laws are visible. People know what they're being charged. There are a lot of things in the current Lagos state law that are being left to the discretion that will be dealt with by regulations. And we already have issues around regulations being issued by minister or even by the president, let alone when we start to have these being issued by state authorities. So there are a great number of issues around there. One of the underlying problems is probably around the sharing formula, not just for VAT, but for the entire Nigerian Commonwealth and how it is spread across. It's the use of hypothecated taxes that are taking out from that pot, money that goes to particular tiers at different points. So there are numerous issues, numerous underlying problems that have led to where we are now, and some of these things are crystallizing. And I think the VAT boil is the one that has become ripe and is the one that is causing some of these issues. My prayer is that we would, the Supreme Court would fast forward its case to provide certainty as to the current position. We can then negotiate to arrive at a position that does not interfere with the ease of doing business in Nigeria, does not increase the tax burden on the end users and taxpayers without a concomitant, visible, and transparent allocation of those funds to the services that the taxpayers are expecting from their system. I think I'll rest at this particular point. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark Abani. And I did promise our viewers that you would share a story. And the story of teaching grandmothers to suck eggs. That's a good one. I think I will use that. I'll add that to my repertoire. I'll probably credit you at some point, but I'll take some credit for that. But I mean, you've spoken so much and weave so many threads around the culture of impunity that's prevalent in many sectors of Nigeria, where people who ought really to be doing more to contribute to the tax net actually do not do so. And so we need to bridge the trust deficit between the federating units and the revenue collecting agents so that they can harmonize a strategy to bring more people into the tax net. If South Africa, as Aditola said, with much less people than we have, can generate as much as almost 10 times more than we are generating in terms of personal income tax, that tells you how wide the gap can be. The states have been very active in this area. My friend, my brother, Professor Abiola Sani, SAN designate. I'm being careful not to offend the rules of the profession ahead of his swearing in, but I think at least it's okay to address you, sir, as SAN designate. He's been very active in this field for as long as I've known him. I remember back in 2006, that you first took the matter to the Supreme Court on the Lagos State issue, the Lagos State hotel occupancy law vis-a-vis VAT. He has published several thought-leading books and articles on this VAT debate, the federating question, the constitutionality of the whole arrangement. And I know that he has very, very unique perspectives, both from the perspective of the states and that of a seasoned legal practitioner. So I invite Professor Sani to share his unique views with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jibola. I think it's safer to just call me Abiola, a professor of law, University of Lagos. Thank you so much for all the kind words you have said about me. I sincerely appreciate. Well, when I was invited here about issues around the VAT debate, I didn't know it's going to be something as serious as setting 14 questions. You see, Wole started as a scholar, whether or not he's still in the academics, is a scholar in practice. So the way and manner he reeled out those 14 questions is very, very thrilling to me. But let me assure you that our intervention at this type of initiative is not likely to address all these issues. The issues you have raised are so fundamental, and I can assure you that those are the issues that are already playing out in the processes filed so far in the court. And my perspective is that to solve this type of problem, there should be an organic review of the problem through a study group so that we have a proper evaluation and then look at the undercurrent issues, their manifestations, and then the alternative ways of solving it. So I'm going to be recommending at the end of my presentation that if the government is not thinking of having a structured study of the problem, it is high time they started doing so. It is an imperative that we cannot defer any longer. So having said that, it's important for us to know that the problem with VAT did not start now. It started when in 1979, those who drafted the Constitution did not take on board the lessons from Aberu Agba. If you look at the case of Aberu Agba, it had already pointed us to the fact that both federal and states have taxing power on sales tax, which is a precursor of VAT. So what they should have done at that stage was to firmly and fairly decide who is going to be allocated the taxing right. Because what Aberu Agba decided was that both federal and states do have taxing power on sales tax. The power of the state limited to the intrastate transactions, while that of the federal is limited to interstate and international. So my worry is that most of the cases that have been going to court in recent times, including that the Attorney General of Rivers and the FRS, they have not taken full advantage of this jurisprudence established in that case. And this to me is a very big mistake. So there is no way you are going to have a decision on an issue like this if the judges are properly guided, and you will not have a definite pronouncement of the applicability or otherwise of the case of Aberu Agba. So in 1999 also, there was also a big mistake on the part of those who drafted the Constitution. Excuse taxing power of VAT, because VAT had been in existence since 1993. So it has been in existence 6 years before that Constitution was enacted. And it shows utter lack of awareness on the part of those who drafted the Constitution. So that is the foundation of the problem. And another big problem was that as soon as the 1999 Constitution kicked in, either the federal or the state should have modified of Section 315 of the Constitution. And what Section 315 is all about is that if there is a law made during the military before the new Constitution, and then the equation had changed, a federal subject matter had become a state matter, or vice versa. So instead of going through the legislative route of amending the Constitution or repealing or enacting a new law, that provision is a fast track to modifying the law so that there will not be, the transition period can be very limited, and then there won't be an unacceptable gap in the administration of law. So the states who are now clamoring to have power in respect of VAT did not do the right thing. They should have modified the VAT Act in such a manner that as far as intrastate transactions are concerned, they could then impose taxes on it. But that didn't happen. The approach of some states was to reintroduce their state sales tax. So if we have a proper understanding of the value addition of VAT, there is really no reason to go back to the sales tax of states. But that was what happened. And then we had a regime of double taxation where states insisted on collecting VAT from its residents, notwithstanding that VAT is also being collected simultaneously. So the state left the battle for the taxpayers, which to me is a terrible approach, because it is the responsibility of states to secure its stuff, and also the responsibility of the federal government to secure its stuff. If states are encroaching on the jurisdiction of the federal government, what I expect the federal government to do is to operationalize or utilize the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court under Section 232 in order to determine timeously who has power on that issue. But we didn't see this happen. So we have a situation where taxpayers will go to court, initially the State High Court, and then the verdict at the State High Court consistently was in favor of the states, until a court now came up with a very unique or ingenious approach by approaching the Federal High Court and asking the Federal High Court to determine whether it is states or federal who has the power to collect the tax. And then the Federal High Court started by vindicating the VAT Act on the basis of covering the field. But now we have a situation where federal high courts are now moving against VAT and vindicating the state rights. So it's basically a question of whether you are a federalist or you are anti-federalist. Now to go to a question which I think will be of interest to KPMG clients who may be on call. On the issue of tax compliance, the whole essence of the Court of Appeal decision that status quo ante should be maintained is that there cannot be any implementation of the state VAT law at the moment. So the Rivers State VAT law has not taken effect as far as that judgment is concerned, because it cannot be implemented. So in terms of compliance, I will say that there is nothing to worry about at this time. Then my study of the historical evolution of multiplicity of taxes, double taxation, reveals that organized private sector will not pay the same tax twice. So they always come either under the aegis of manufacturer association or under the aegis of some other NGO to fight back. And what we have at the moment is that the organized private sector is not paying the consumption tax and the VAT tax simultaneously. So that is very, very important. And the implication for even Rivers State is that Rivers State is beginning, it still continues to share from the revenue of VAT. So right now, there is no loss to Rivers State as well. Rivers State continues to share what it has been enjoying under the revenue sharing formula before now. So people will want to know how the case in the Supreme Court is likely to be decided. Honestly, there is no yes or no answer to this. But the first question posed by Wole is going to play out prominently. And let me guide us by the jurisprudence that already exists in our legal space. Based on Aberuagba, it will be difficult for the Supreme Court to rule that federal government lacks power on VAT, because Aberuagba had clearly stated that federal government has power on international, VAT on import, for example, VAT on international professional services. No state can collect that. Then, Aberuagba also held that states have power on transaction within their jurisdiction. So, unless Supreme Court reconsiders its position in that case, what I foresee is a situation where the federalists will be vindicated, and those who are also in favor of the states will be vindicated. Now, looking at the case of AG Rivers and FRS, there are aspects of that case that I find very troubling, as much as I'm a federalist. And let me mention two. A wholesale invalidation of VAT Act is very, very surprising. And I didn't see a critical review of Aberuagba in that case. Because if we go by that provision, by that pronouncement, even the federal government can no longer collect VAT on imports. And if you look at the statistics, about 50% of VAT comes from imports. And also, that case made some pronouncement on the validity of personal income tax, withholding tax, technology tax, and then NIDA levy, and said that these taxes are inconsistent with the Constitution, and then declared null and void. I sincerely doubt if that decision can stand, because this type of taxes are variants of income tax. They are variants of income tax. And my review of the Rivers State VAT law and also that of Lagos State VAT law also reveal some fundamental assumptions on their part, which may not be totally correct. You see, you cannot make a law on Monday, then begin the implementation on Tuesday. It's not going to work. Because under the law that was made, there were certain administrative imperatives of administrative fundamentals or building blocks which ought to be in place. For example, registration of taxpayer. But the assumption they made was thinking that the VAT collected under the old law will just be handed over to them. And that has not happened, and I don't think that is likely to happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, generally on the issue of addressing the equity, one approach is to review the sharing formula. But there are states who are very strong on protection of their fiscal jurisdiction, because ordinarily consumption tax should be the bedrock, should be the major source of revenue for states. And if you look at other federating units, this is a state matter. But in Nigeria, it's a state law that is being administered by the federal government in a manner, and the revenue distribution is being done in a manner that some states have rightly raised the issue of fairness. But my own preferred approach is to allow states who want to administer their VAT, their sales tax or their consumption tax to do so. Because by the nature of VAT, states cannot implement VAT because VAT has intrastate, international, and intrastate dimension. So what the options open to states will be to expand their consumption tax law to include services and some other items so that the base is not specific to the hotel and hospitality sector. So there are bound to be issues relating to administration. If we want to learn from the experience of other countries, we could have a situation where the state and the federal will cooperate. Federal can collect on behalf of states that lack the capacity. That is what is being done in Canada, and that is what is being done in Brazil. I think my time is up. So basically, if we have a careful study of this problem, we could actually collaborate in such a way that this is going to be a win-win. But it requires much more than I've seen on the part of states. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I hope in the course of question and answer, I will be able to respond to some of the issues that time did not allow me to cover. So thank you very much, Ajibola and the KPMG family for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Professor Sani. And this has been very insightful. Thank you again for reminding us of Aberu Agba. I believe that decision was in 1986 and even predates the introduction of VAT itself, but it was on sales tax. But the principles are exactly as you have stated, and it sets a framework for the Supreme Court to entertain any further disputes. This has been so enlightening, and I appreciate the comments you have made. You have also assured manufacturing companies and trading companies, Nigerians as a whole, that we will not pay multiplicity of taxes on account of all these laws that are coming through the system. I believe that will be of extreme comfort to Dr. Titi Fowokon, although I can see her shaking her head. So I won't steal her thunder. I will let her tell you whether she agrees or she disagrees. And I invite Dr. Fowokon to please share her views. As someone who is on the hot seat, she represents the biggest conglomerate in Nigeria, and they are one of the biggest contributors to the tax net. So Dr. Fowokon, your views, please.
Thank you, Ajibola. I hope everyone can hear me. Good morning to the panelists and to KPMG for giving me this opportunity to be on this panel discussion. I would say that having heard everybody from the tax policy to principles behind the matter and also problem study and analysis angle from Prof, I want to say that I'll be left with talking as an industry person. How do we see this debate? What are our agitations and what do we look at for? Because we would not want anything that would disrupt the way we do businesses. We would not want anything that would put unnecessary strain on everybody because there are issues at the government level. So I'll be talking more on the industry perspective and how do we see it, what do we think, and what are our agitations. I will start from the administrative burden that this debate, if it swings to the side of the state, will cause for the industry. Imagine where you have business operation in 36 states and you have FIRS at the federal. So you're faced with the challenge of having to face returns for those 36 states and also keep your normal federal returns to FIRS. So that already is enough to give you some nightmares. And so as far as we are concerned, you have a central VAT. You can use the ERP have been structured to capture the transactions across the locations. So what this is going to happen is that you now have to start thinking of how do you now unbundle what you've done to take care of each of the states. Now, that's one of the concerns that we're looking at, and this may not be as easy as anybody may think. Now, look at we have issues around, you don't have activities, you have to file new returns. So you now have to start defending why you're filing new returns in each state. So it's another issue. Now we have VAT when you have a vendor across different states, and then you have VAT recharge, reverse VAT charge. No, you have to look at all those ones too. The cost of having to go through that, there may be each state have different ways they want to apply their VAT. From what we've seen from Rivers and Lagos states, it's not looking like, though it may be similar, but we can see some things that are making it different. So we're already looking at what would be the impact. There may be likely litigations when you start fighting every state over issues, then it becomes an issue for you. Now, secondly, we'll be talking about the reporting requirements on a state by state. We are very used to the standard. FRS gives us a template. Now we're on ProMax. We know what to do on ProMax. We have studied it. And then each state comes with its own method. Is it all states that will be online? Is it all states that will be technology driven? That's going to be an issue. So what that means is that we have to now start unbundling. Most companies have formed their processes around what we have now. So you have a law that came, when I saw that laws and they said implemented immediately, and my branches called, I said, please hold on. Nobody's going to move, because even where we have the national laws, there's a time for implementation. It's not immediate. So we had to just tell ourselves, let's not run into confusion and allow things to take its course. So there'll be issue about the state by state, on the side of the sales that we make in different states, on the side of the cost of sales, which comes with the input VAT. So how do we handle this? These are concerns. Now we have imports. We still relate with FIRS on imports. We now relate with the local domestic purchases for each state. And that's another issue. Different rates, if we look at it the way they're going. So the implication for states that are export-free zones, what happens? So we say, are they not going to come up with their own laws? We already have NEPSA that is guiding what we do. We have the normal VAT, the general VAT that is guiding what we do in respect to exports. So are we now going to have different states coming with their own laws that will guide exports from their states? You know, those are concerns. Multiple registration. You know, we have to now start registering for different countries, different states for different at different purposes. Penalties. We already have penalty in the extant VAT law. Now each state comes up with its own penalties. So you start battling with different penalties, different penalty regime, trying to struggle to meet the different requirements. So these are concerns agitating the minds of the industry players. We talk about automation. We need how many states are automated? How many states will not take us back? You know, it's like taking us back to some era that we don't want to mention. We've moved a lot in terms of the way the tax system is now. We can sit in the though we can say, everyone says, oh fine, you can sit in the comfort of your room, you press a button, but it's not always going to be the same. Everybody's going to have his own process. Thirdly, when we talk about modalities for input VAT claim, we know manufacturing, we have to talk about cost of sales. The input VAT claim is a major issue. What this means is that there's impossibility to make your claims, then you're going to be paying huge VAT to different states at different rates. This can result in double taxation. You've paid the VAT on your cost of sales, then you're not paying the VAT. Instead of getting your relief, you're paying it again. So it's a concern. Then issues about place of operation. We have manufacturing in Lagos. We are moving it down to different states. So we'll now have to face, okay, we have depot here, we have depot there. What will be the implication? Each state has enacted its own law. So it means that for each of the depots, you must now look at what is the state law, comply with. Already we are still struggling with managing payee across the 36 states. You're also struggling with other taxes. You know, we have other levies. We have things like the state levies that are also there. So you're now having additional issues coming from the states, which you have to battle with. So it's going to be another ball game. Audits is also a concern. Now you have state audit, then you now have VAT audit, knowing fully well that VAT is not like pay that is just coming from salaries. You have your imports, you have your sales across different places. So how do you manage the audits? We have special businesses. So how do we manage the audits across the state, and it doesn't become a costly experience for the taxpayers? So there's some concern about that. We're looking at ease of doing business. We can see that this will probably negate that objective, because by the time it comes up, your cost is going to definitely increase. You're not going to have to be battling with each state at every point in time. Now, for those in the industry, we are concerned about confidentiality of our information. And you mean you're going to have to be giving because VAT is not just ordinary salaries and everything. You are going to have to deal with a lot of customers, a lot of vendors, a lot of transactions, so which has to come to the purview of different states. So you might have to be filing in this state, in that state, in that state, in that state. Are you sure that you are not getting information to the public? In fact, the question is, can you sue if there's a leak of information and somebody's coming to you? You can't really say you want to sue. So, and we have a lot of insecurity around. So people are so agitated. I have information there. My transactions are being reviewed. So how do you manage that as an industry person? Because you must file these returns, you must provide this information, you must submit all these documents if you have to go through this. So we have issues around within the organization itself. Not every organization have a robust tax team. So you're not saying the little resources you have will have to be stretched, because you are adding more to what they have to do. They're not going to face only doing because now we know it's only FIRS. I can decide and say, for entities that are within ECOE, they deal with FIRS office, so I can face that. But I will now have FIRS in different locations. I will also have states in different locations. Now, these states can even say, you are not going to even deal with us at the state capital level. You are not dealing with us at local government level. We don't know what will come out of it. But we're saying once that comes, you're not going to have to be straining your resources. You're not going to, you'll be dropping the ball before you know. And it becomes an issue of penalty. Costs will increase, and then litigation problem starts. So it's not going to even make you to be able to do your business that you're looking out for. Skills gap is a concern. Well, I know Adetola spoke about the ability of the state to administer VAT. Let's be sincere with ourselves. Most of the state activities are centered around personal income tax and state taxes. By the time you start going into VAT, VAT is not just as simple. In fact, it's the smallest law bit of our act, but has more headache. Let me put it that way. In terms of how it's administered, you have the input, the output, the export, the exemptions and things like that. So it's an issue that we felt for the IRS personnel, there would be some challenges with being able to grapple with the VAT application, especially when you're now talking about specialized businesses. How will VAT apply to them? Capital market transactions, and they are operating in this state. Well, the issue around divergent treatment of VAT input and output, because everybody would want to come up with their own, unless we are saying everybody's taking a cue from the federal law, which we are not seeing. So if everybody is allowed, then what would be the recourse for the taxpayer when there are divergent treatments on the input and output VAT? Technology gap. We can also see that on the part of the states, not all states will be able to get the necessary technology to be able to drive this thing. Though COVID has made our life to be, everybody is now driven, but we still have some drawbacks. So an investment in technology is not what you close your eyes to do. In the midst of the challenges we have in the country, you can't just say you want to close your eyes to do something. You must do it, and it must work well. Not a technology that we invest in and it's to be scrapped. So that is something that takes time. So these are areas that we're looking at, the multi-operational base of taxpayers versus the technology that will be required with this day and time. It's also something that we felt needs to be looked into. What if the states come up with their laws and FIRS says, okay, anything that you are not going through our own federal law is not allowable for VAT claims? Well, it could happen, but we're saying what could be the other things that could happen in terms of what this comes. There will be some conditions for you to claim your input. And then if you have an input under state, how do you claim it under federal? If you have an input under federal, how do you claim it under state? These are areas that we feel if there's no harmony, then there'll be issues for us. Now, difference in VAT rates. We've already started seeing this. I'll put in 7.5% for VAT. So I'll put in 6% for VAT. I'll put in 5% for VAT. So you are not, we expect now that whoever is going to process those transactions will now look for which rate is applicable. We already have a challenge with that on withholding tax, because already on withholding tax, you have 10, you have 5, you have different transactions. Now, adding that, that's another layer. So operational wise, it could be another challenge for the businesses to manage. Now, things around sectorial knowledge is also important. We have the specialized businesses, we have insurance, we have oil and gas, we have different levels of businesses that the way the VAT is applicable is not the same. So if you now allow each state to do it, that means we have to start educating for understanding of the business to make life easy in terms of administration, additional compliance costs, which is not at the favor of the taxpayers. These are concerns. Now, I now look back when this oil problem came and I said, what would SMEs do? We have SMEs who even now are trying to understand how the normal tax laws operate under the federal, under the FIRS regime. Some of them would just think, oh, it's VAT, let me just apply. But now with the state coming up, they have to now stretch themselves to understand this, and penalties are not that easy. Now for you now, if you don't pay, you have your penalty counting on daily basis, on monthly basis, and you can imagine what will be the impact of this. So we're actually looking at the way this agitation will pinch the industry, the way it would affect everyone that is in the industry, and the way it will affect our system, the way it will affect our administration, the way it will affect our operations. So we're actually not looking at this being something that cannot be resolved. Well, on the side of what can we say, as far as we are concerned, I know most of the problem is the sharing formula, the derivation policies and things like that. I believe it's something that can be looked into. It's something that we can sit back, like the other speakers have said. We look at the sharing formula. We look at what does the Constitution say. Everybody has said there are such gaps. So the question is, how do we go ahead and fix it? Why don't we have a dialogue around the way to harmonize these things? Otherwise, there'll be chaos. Taxpayers will start running helter-skelter, and it'll be an issue. We have countries that run proper VAT, like Adesola said, the Nigerian VAT. Why can't we just look at how VAT should be run? It requires us sitting back. Like Prof. Sonny said, he said, we need to do a problem analysis. This is necessary. So we need to actually do that problem analysis. And also, there should be a proper education in terms of how should we align. States and federal should align. We can't wait to see a position favorable to taxpayers at the end of this debate. So we just look forward to we having a good position that will not be running helter-skelter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fowokon. You've raised so many important points. I found myself nodding and nodding. At the point I was developing a headache from nodding too much, because on the data privacy issue, you are very spot on. In fact, about a year or two ago, we had a relevant tax authority that actually had a data leak, and the data of taxpayers were leaked into the public domain. So you are right, we need to be concerned about that. We also need to be concerned about several of the things you have mentioned. For example, we've had courts that have blended the destination principle with the place of consumption principle, and the Finance Acts have tried to resolve that, but the versions of the VAT law that have been passed by the state don't take that into account. So you may find one state using destination, another state using consumption. But there have been a lot of questions in the chat box. Let me hand it over at this point to Akinwale Alao, Director at KPMG, who will moderate the Q&A sessions. I know Professor Sani has another program he will be moderating in another few minutes. So we'll try to send Professor Sonny's questions to him first, and then we can let him go. I know Dr. Fowokon is also speaking at that function, so we'll graduate you after Professor Sani. But we thank you so much for your time this morning. But please stay with us as long as you can for the Q&A. If you take a look at the chat box, everybody wants to hear your views. So please don't run off until you absolutely have to. Akinwale, please.
Thanks a lot, Ajibola. It's been a very interesting debate so far. Thank you very much to all the panelists. So I will proceed to ask the questions that seem to be more suited for Professor Abiola Sonny. The first one that was asked by an anonymous participant is, while we wait for the outcome of the ongoing VAT court cases, a taxpayer who filed new returns for VAT pending the outcome of the court cases, will such be viewed as not complying with the VAT laws? So the taxpayer, since there is no certainty yet, has decided to file new VAT returns. And the taxpayer is asking if it would be right. There is another question about the status quo that has been declared by the Court of Appeal. The question goes thus. It says, I assume that maintaining status quo ante bellum means we should continue to remit VAT to the FIRS pending the determination of the case by the court. Kindly clarify. That's from Dicey. And then the third question for you, so that you just take all of them at a go, is how do we resolve the issue of input and output VAT net off if states are to undo VAT administration? So those are the questions for you, Professor Abiola. So I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Akinwale. Thank you, Jibola, for your understanding. You see, when you serve many masters, you have many errands to run. So on the first question, the filing of lien return, this has to be under the extant VAT Act. So nothing has changed. So we continue to do what we have been doing from before. There is no offset as far as the Court of Appeal had issued an interim order that the VAT law of state Rivers State should not be enforced. So the answer is that you continue to do exactly what you have been doing before now. I think that also ties to Dicey's question. So you continue to relate with the FIRS. In any case, neither Rivers nor Lagos, in my view, has actually set up the administrative framework for their law. And this is where I think they are getting it wrong. If you look at the VAT Act when it was established in 1993, for almost 1 year, the administration was put in abeyance until consultation and stakeholders' engagement were concluded. There was even a modified value-added tax committee that was in charge of the administration before FIRS came in. And the states should not think that they can actually start implementing their variants of VAT law without putting the administrative machinery in place. Then on input and output VAT, this is the hallmark of VAT all over the world. And that is what distinguishes VAT from other variants of consumption tax, especially GST, general sales tax, or turnover tax. And the implication of that is that if a registered person suffered input tax, it should be able to net it off against the output tax collected. So everybody is motivated to be a collecting agent. Now lawyers, accountants who are struggling with VAT, if they have the opportunity to net off VAT on their consumption, they will be the first to go and queue and register as VAT collector. But what we have in Nigeria is not a VAT, so to speak, because there is restriction in terms of what can be net off against the output VAT collected. So because of the input and output mechanism, no state, like I said, can actually implement VAT, because the power of the state is limited to the territories of the state. But if we have interstate and international dimension, there won't be any way to actually claim the credit against the output VAT. Then before I dash off, if we had also learned from the past, ordinarily this case should have started from the Supreme Court. Because if you look at Aberu Agba, the case started from the High Court of Ogun State. But the CJ of that state, Justice Coker of the blessed memory, he saw the significance of the case, and then parties formulated issues and questions, and they referred case stated to the Court of Appeal. And when the matter eventually was decided by the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal, an appeal went from the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court invited all the attorney generals because of the importance. So I think ideally this matter should have started from the Federal Court, from the Supreme Court, pursuant to the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The only stumbling block in that regard was also an earlier decision of the Supreme Court in the case of Attorney General of Lagos and Attorney General of the Federation, to the effect that the matter should go back to the State High Court. So we all have something to learn from all this debate. And finally, it's a question of whether you are a federalist or whether you are an anti-federalist. There will be problem if states are allowed to exercise their power, but this problem can be managed. If you look at personal income tax that states are administering right now, it's even more complex than VAT. VAT is relatively easier compared to personal income tax. So all those issues that we highlighted as obstacle can actually be warehoused and discussed. And then we have jurisdictions where even local governments have power to determine the rates. So we only have a situation where they do not have the power to administer. They can piggyback into the state and the federal laws. And the position that I've articulated in all my writings is that states should be allowed to exercise their power. Where they lack capacity, they should team up with the federal or team up with the other tax agencies. And I like the suggestions by Mark on what JTB can actually do in order to help us harmonize this. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here this morning.
Thank you very much, Professor Abiola Sani. We sincerely appreciate your contributions to this debate. So I would move to Dr. Titi Fowokon. We have a question for you that goes thus. It says, I think centralized VAT administration is easier, but easier does not make it the best. I think the agitation is mainly the unjust distribution. So, it's a comment really, but would like to get your take on it. And then the other one is, with all the concerns raised, are we saying that we are running the best system of government? What happens when we practice true federalism? So we'll just allow you to answer, to respond to that question and comment before you go. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Akinwale. I was expecting that. Now, when we look at the fact that I said VAT, centralized VAT, the fact that VAT is centralized is easier to implement because you have to also look at the ease of being able to comply and administer these things. So what we are saying, we may say, we are saying that it's not yet there. And that was what I was saying. Why don't you just look at how VAT is run in other places and see what we can learn from those other jurisdictions to update or improve on the way we administer at VAT. But once we remove it from the issue of being centralized, it becomes a challenge for administration. It becomes a challenge for compliance. So our focus will now be shifted from looking at one point of call, which is FIRS, making sure you go by it, to now having to deal with 36 states on the same thing at different levels. So that's not going to be an easy thing to administer. Then in terms of the concerns, like I would say that there's a lot to do on the issue of fiscal federalism. We've been saying it again and again. So, but we can't stop saying it until when we get to the level we expect. So I'm not saying that what we have now is the best, but we should not dismantle it because we are saying it's not the best. But we should look for how to improve on it such that every party is not losing out. We are all coming to terms. You know, it's not easy for you to get some things done, especially when it comes to government. But as this debate is going on, it's opening up a lot of things and it's making us to realize what we need to do and causing parties to come to terms to see what can we do to move forward. There's a lot to do. In fact, the issues to resolve in this country is multifaceted and we have to start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. The issues are indeed multifaceted. Hopefully, there will be clarity when the judgments of the courts are coming. So I would move to Adetola at this point. There are a lot of questions that have come in for you, Adetola. So I will just quickly read them. The first one is more of a comment. The participant said, I do not agree with your second point that states do not have the structure to collect VAT. They collect pay tax, remember? All that the states need to do is to reimagine their collection strategy. There is no hard and fast rule to this. The benefits far outweigh the apparent difficulty they may encounter. This is a bold step towards fiscal federalism. So that's a comment. And then another participant said, thank you for the presentation, Adetola. Don't you think we should have a national dialogue or think tank to streamline the VAT debate? And then there is a question regarding international or cross-border transactions. Someone posted a question, said, recently I bought some books online from Amazon UK. At the point of paying with my Nigerian card, I noticed they had charged VAT at 17.5%, most likely UK VAT. What are the tax authorities doing to avoid this leakage of VAT on e-commerce? And then there's another one still on cross-border transactions that goes there. It says, my question is on reverse charge, especially for vendors who are not VAT registered in Nigeria. Some of the vendors are global. How are the authorities working on checking that cost escalation does not arise because of this reverse charge, and at the same time make the global vendors pay tax in Nigeria? So Adetola, maybe we would let you handle those first set of questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all my fellow participants and panelists. I really did enjoy your session. To start with the first guy, well, states are collecting payee. If you listen to what a lot of us have said earlier on, it's quite clear that even the capacity to collect is suspect, you know, even with respect to payee. You know, we had shared to you that we are not even getting as much as we should from payee like we're getting right now. Even with Lagos, even if I use the in quotes, the richest state, which is the state where I reside, Lagos State, population is about 17.5 million people. That's the data we have been given. PIT, not just payee alone, PIT, not just payee alone, was about $778 million last year. It's a far cry from what it should be, given the individuals that are residing in this state. So it's I think it was Prof and Dr. Bani that was sharing with us, even the sheer political will to go after people to pay payee, it's a problem. So imagine what it will be when it's VAT. Secondly, I also talked about the issue of cost of collection. History and data haven't shown us that they have been good stewards when it comes to cost of collection. So why do we want to also hand this over to them again? So we need to think about this more. And I quite agree with the second question. Is a national dialogue overdue? Obviously, it's quite clear that we're not talking to one another, you know, and like Professor recommended, perhaps it's high time we have another study group. Will the study group have all the answers? I don't know. But every study group we've had over the last year have already pinpointed us to where the problem is. If this is direction we want to go as a federation, these are the clear things we then need to do. So it's about the political will and the, I think the conversations together and asking ourselves, do we just want to be one Nigeria? So which is why, is it that you're a federalist or you're not? Do you want Nigeria or you're not? Do you want to tear apart the republic or not? So if the answer is we're better together, then we must all come together to solve our problems. That would be my answer. On Amazon charging you VAT, that means you didn't tell them it was for export, because ordinarily that should actually be VAT exempt. If you were buying a book on Amazon, and it should have been treated as VAT exempt, and you should actually then pay the VAT when you ship the books in by the port. So the shipper or whoever must have helped you do your importation should have actually been the one to charge you the VAT. I mean, so you should actually be paying Nigerian VAT instead. And what are we doing with respect to this? Some of the things we're doing, I think I'll take these 3 and 4 together because they sort of align. Some of the things we've done is also to, I think it was the Finance Act, where we have introduced the concept of signal economic presence. Because really, this is something that predominantly affects services and digital transactions. If you look at goods is easy. They're going to come into the port. So when they come into the port, we'll charge the VAT and we'll collect the VAT. But for services, it's a bit different. So what we've done is to then put in a clause, you know, to then say, this is the threshold, you know, from a Nigerian perspective on what we take as single economic presence. So once you cross the minimum threshold of 25 million, which is what we put in to say anybody below 25 million, don't bother, you know, in terms of taxes. But once you cross into above 25 million, then it kicks in. So if you do something online with, let me use an example, maybe Netflix or even Amazon Prime or anything, we will start to tax that entity in Nigeria once their transaction crosses 25 million. So I'm aware that a lot of them have even started filing, Netflix particular, and a few others who are involved in digital. So if you have a service, maybe over the years, what should happen naturally is if Amazon has looked at their transactions within a year and realized that our services into Nigeria or our digital sales into Nigeria has crossed 25 million within that year, then they have an economic presence in Nigeria and they are required to file in Nigeria. Okay, so that's really important. With respect to the concept of reverse charge, what are we doing to ensure that there's no cost escalation? The concept of reverse charge isn't peculiar to us. And what we're saying is, if a Nigerian entity is enjoying a service from a foreign entity, the Nigerian entity should self-account for the VAT because it's in line with destination principle, because you are enjoying that service. The current rate is 7.5%. I don't expect anybody to increase it. And one of the things we've also done is to disallow taxes so that we also don't ensure that you don't escalate your cost. Because we've also said to you that if you're maybe using your gross up contracts and all that, those would not be allowable for us. That's just to help you manage from a cost perspective. So if you have a lot of gross up contract clauses, you can go back as an entity to your various service providers to say, oh, you have a basis to negotiate your gross up contract going forward. So Nigeria no longer allows or permits gross up contract clauses that I would suffer it because they would disallow the taxes you've grossed up. So that can help you, a bit in cost escalation. But that's the best I can give you. I hope I've been able to address some of the questions, Wale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adetola. I think you've addressed the questions. So the last set of questions go to Dr. Abani. Thank you so much for your contributions, sir. So I'll just ask 2 questions because we're running out of time. The first one goes there. It says Lagos State in its VAT Act indicates a lower VAT rate. How will this be managed against other states with higher VAT rates, particularly relating to the potentially higher input VAT against output? So, the question is where you have a situation where VAT rate in Lagos is 6% VAT rate in Rivers State is 7.5%. How will the input-output mechanism work in that kind of situation? And then the second question, so that you take both questions together, says a major point of worry. Why is government always saddled with activities on how to take from citizens and are currently strategizing on how to expand the tax horizon or increase tax rate? There is no engaging in activities on how to give back to citizens. No matter what type of tax, it is still the citizens that bear the tax burden. When will there be government that would engage in thinking that's beneficial to citizens? So I think that's more of a political question than a technical question, but we thought to raise it with you since it's been asked. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, on the differential rates, I think this has been mentioned by my colleagues in each and every one of their comments and presentations. It's going to be a major issue. If you have a differential VAT rates for input and output tax, then you are going to run into situations where some of the input tax will be stranded. So it will actually, everybody will be the worse off for that. So it's one of the reasons why, even if we have to go to state laws, assuming that the Supreme Court says we should go to state laws, there will still be a need to harmonize all the state laws, certain critical aspects of all the state laws, so that there is a uniformity that does not interrupt the flow of business and does not leave some businesses or taxpayers worse off as a result of it. Now, I know every state will say we're individual, separate, we do all of this stuff, but there are core fundamentals. My grandmother's teaching people to suck eggs. We have to go back to the principles of taxation. We have to go back to the national tax policy. And these apply, and I know, and I have worked with states across the country who are developing their own state tax policies, but there are some key fundamentals that must remain in all of these laws. One of them is that there should be no unintentional losers or winners. There can be intentional losers or winners when government is trying to use tax policy to drive behaviors in particular manners. But other than that, there should be a level playing field. And so there will be a fallout, will be a need to have a national dialogue among very many other national dialogues on what are the key technical aspects that we need to agree.
I think there's a network glitch from Dr. Abani's end. I hope it's resolved soon.
Perhaps you can ask any other remaining questions, Akinwale, while we wait for Dr. Abani to rejoin us.
Okay. Okay, I will do just that. So, Aditola, I think I'll just ask you the last question that we may be able to entertain.
I'm sorry about
Dr.
that.
Abani is back now.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. So that national dialogue will still need to take place. The basics of taxation remain across the system. The other question was around double taxation. And I've said that Lagos State has already carved out and tried to preserve its consumption tax and prevent a double charge to both Lagos VAT and consumption tax. But there's still a number of fundamental issues that are not addressed or that are left to regulations that need to be addressed. And if we're going to go down that route, then that has to come across the entire piece. On the question of why is government always taking taxes and not giving back? In actual fact, I'm privy to sit in places where the conversations actually are around how do we make sure that taxpayers are getting benefits. The problem in Nigeria is the elephant in the room. It's corruption. It's how we spend money that is being given to the state at all three tiers of government. And until we start to put that money visibly back to where taxpayers can see that they're getting a benefit for the money they're putting in, that trust will not be there. Studies by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, supported by Bill and Melinda Gates, a recent study done by the Nigerian Governors Forum as part of our work on trying to promote a tax for service, especially for the informal, smaller sector, where, as I said, a lot of children die from malaria. Connect health to the taxes they pay so that there's a visible connection, and that helps to start to drive compliance and ultimately voluntary compliance. Until those things are addressed, we have money. We do need to make sure that the services are provided. We do need, and as citizens, we also should hold our elected officers to account. You don't just sit back and say, that's fine, now so then they do. No, be so then they do. Call them to account. If the road passing your house is no good, make some noise about it. That is your money that is being spent, sometimes on substandard products. So the money is going back. You are part of that solution. Engage with it. I won't get on my soapbox now, so I'll stop at this point. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Abani. I'm mindful of the fact that we have just 9 minutes left. So at this point, I think I would hand over back to you, Ajibola, so that we can begin to close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akinwale, and thank you to Dr. Abani, Dr. Fowoko, Ehile Adetola Ibangbe, and Professor Abiola Sani for your very insightful contributions. It's not my duty to do the vote of thanks. I won't steal Nick Olakorin's thunder, but I will at this stage bring Prince Wole Obayomi back to the podium. He started this show by firing off about 12 questions. I think he's gotten answers to most of them, but I believe the panelists have given him a few more questions for him to ponder. So Wole Obayomi, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Ajibola. I didn't know it was going to be a tit for tat. I just thought to set the stage, for the conversation, and I'm glad that the conversation has been very enriching, and the panelists have done justice to the assignments given to them, and also many thanks to all the participants for their contributions via the Q&A session. I have about 7 points here to say by way of closing remarks, and also to chart the way forward for us on the VAT debate. First point is that the debate shows that there is dissatisfaction with the status quo. So change is inevitable, and the question is whether we continue with the centralized VAT regime or invent a new decentralized VAT regime. The outcome of the Supreme Court decision and maybe any legislative action following that will determine the way forward. Secondly, a decentralized VAT regime will have institutional, operational, administrative, and financial challenges. However, if this becomes inevitable, all we have to do is to agree the shape and form of that decentralized VAT regime, but it's no reason to say that we should not have it. And there are learnings from other countries, particularly federations like India, Canada, and Brazil, which we can leverage to develop a bespoke decentralized VAT regime in Nigeria in light of our peculiar circumstances. Now, if a state does not have capacity to administer VAT and to optimize cost of collection, I'm of the view that they can actually engage the FRS as a collection agency to do so on their behalf, and FRS will be accountable to them. Alternatively, FRS can continue to collect VAT for the federal government and all the states and be accountable to each one of them. I mean, technology will help to do that, to know what goes to which state and the federation. And this will be particularly useful to address the issue of VAT, input VAT recovery on interstate transactions and VAT refunds. A decentralized VAT regime will escalate cost of compliance by taxpayers, no doubt about that. Dr. Titi Fowoko very well articulated that in terms of multiple registrations, multiple filings, multiple VAT audits by the state, internal revenue service, where business operates, and also the federal government. Again, this could be an area where central administration of a decentralized VAT system by the FRS as an option, that may be considered, because then FRS can, be like the honest broker, between all the parties, ensure that, okay, where VAT, input VAT is going to be recovered, it ensures that where VAT is going to be refunded, it ensures that, and then the net amount of VAT due to each state or the federal government is given to them. And then again, they'll then be centralized. Even with multiple registration, the administration can then be centralized. So filings can also be centralized as well. And then the multiple VATs can be eliminated with FRS doing that. Of course, it can involve some staff of the State Internal Revenue Service. Third point to make is that if centralization will continue, depending on the outcome of the court cases, we need to revisit the sharing formula between the three tiers of government to ensure fairness and equity in response to the yearnings of the states. I think that it's very well put, and we can't overemphasize that. Fourth point is that whatever reform that we will be making to the VAT regime, this must not undermine the ease of doing business in Nigeria, and the tax burden on taxpayers must not be aggravated. Fifth point is that the VAT laws of Rivers and Lagos states are outdated and flawed on some fronts. I just mentioned two of them. First is the dichotomy of rates, which will cause problems for input VAT recovery from output VAT. Second point is the non-sensitivity of those laws to the nuances of interstate commerce over which the federal government has jurisdiction, particularly how input VAT incurred on raw materials of goods purchased in one state, which is the origin state, will be recovered from output VAT charged on sale in another state, which is the destination state. Clearly, that's a matter that needs to be resolved. Sixth point is that if states will enact and administer VAT law under a decentralized VAT regime, this should supersede the consumption tax in states that currently charge consumption tax in order to avoid double taxation. However, the VAT law of Lagos State is silent on this point. However, this must be addressed in the interest of taxpayers. Seventh point is that we need a national dialogue. Dr. Abani, Professor Abiola Sani alluded to that, and I agree that we need to have this as a platform to unravel and resolve the myriad issues involved in the VAT debate and chart the way forward for the future of VAT in Nigeria. The Joint Tax Board may well be a platform for doing this, and these issues can be taken forward there and resolved amicably, because there you have the FRS and all the commissioners for finance, represented by the chairman, men of the State Internal Board of Revenue as members. These are my thoughts based on what I could gain from the conversations at this webinar, and I hope that I've done adequate justice to the issues within the limited time. I want to thank every one of you for listening and for participating at this very successful webinar. It's been very enriching, very interactive, and very engaging. And thanks to my colleagues who have put this together. We look forward to having you all again whenever we hold another KPMG event. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Wole. So I'll invite Nick Olakori to do the formal vote of thanks, and then we can all move on.
Thank you very much, Ajibola, and thank you very much, Wole. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the partners and the management of KPMG Nigeria, we'd like to thank our distinguished panel of speakers, Ehile Adetola Aibangbi, Dr. Mark Abani, Professor Abiola Sani, SAN, and Dr. Titilayo Fowokon, for their time and their passionate contributions to the discussion this morning. We know they have very busy schedules, so we're very grateful for the time spent with us. Equally as important is our distinguished audience. We had about 600 participants on the webinar with us today. We thank you very much for your time as well, and your participation and great questions posed during the Q&A session. I hope you found today's discussion as engaging and enlightening as I surely did. As always at KPMG, we remain committed to remaining at the cusp of issues and matters of relevance to our clients and our community, and we will continue to do this through various forums throughout the year. On that note, I wish to remind you of our upcoming tax chat that will take place on Tuesday, the 26th of October, where we'll be looking at stamp duties and demystifying the controversies around the subject. I hope you'll be able to join us at that session. Once again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time today, and have a pleasant rest of the day. Thank you.
ona uzani tulama mena wangu komuzini ananitamini nahanire na uwe yare na kibada etili kurise uwe yakanirarise no iricha